I
Yeah.
don't know.
Exactly. I don't know which way we'd even go with it, right? It's that crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
crazy.
but I'll describe like let me first set a little background on this. I know that allegedly I'd been told that that we actually have one of these creatures in captivity. They're not what people think. They don't turn from human to a werewolf like the movies show. But
Yeah.
I think where the idea comes from, though, Bonnie, is that the way they look, a lot of people, I guess, think more like a dog like human type thing, but it's actually they have the torso of a man. They walk erect like a man, but they have very elongated feet like that of a wolf. They have like a hunch in their back a little bit, I guess, because of more of the dog type of part of their features. Their arms are very long, much more like that of a monkey. But the head is 100% looks like a wolf. The only difference is the ears are extremely long, very long and pointy. And the body is hairy all the way down, except it's I would call it more like a patchy type of hair on this creature. But when you get from the neck down, start going down, you would think you're looking at a male or a man torso. They do have both female and male versions of these creatures. And from everything that I've ever heard about them is that it is believed that they are pre-flood creatures. They're not creatures that have been experimented in our day and age. These are something that have been around for a long time. They do procreate. They do reproduce. And they're about 7 feet in height. This particular one was being taken in to have an autopsy done on it. I don't know how it had died, but it was dead. I've seen video footage where he was laying on the ground, where they find him at, and then they show the entire torso, and then they're showing him on a gurney, and on the gurney you can clearly see him. Now he's actually, from what I was told initially when they first put him on the gurney, he wasn't dead as of yet. But the creature did die, and so they ended up doing an autopsy on him. But there's unique features about him. He's also, I've been told, that they have the ability to move into the ether. So they do have some interdimensional capabilities. But in fact, I think the last, I guess, Bonnie, about maybe a year ago, I talked about where we had one that was captured on video cam, and people could actually look that one up. I've never been able to find it myself, but I do, because I know they were trying to scrub a lot of that from the internet. But there was a security camera footage that had captured one in Germany, and so they were looking at that, and of course the military guys were all freaking out over this footage they had discovered. And it was on the internet for a period of time, and it may still well be if somebody just knows how to look for that. But it's weird. It's very weird. But you can tell it's not. You can tell it's a real creature. I mean, it doesn't even look not real. It looks real, and it doesn't look hybrid or anything. But maybe. I know that, for example, too, Bonnie, I know our military had made a super soldier somewhat like this, where of course, the project went very, very bad wrong. And they'd created, but they were using the DNA from a wolf, from a bear, and several other creatures. And that creature looks what soldiers that participated in that program, I just couldn't imagine why they would do something like that. But that's totally different than what this is. This is obviously, literally, I guess the best way to describe it, it doesn't look out of place, even though you see the human torso. I guess over the time, let's say if it was where the angels, we know that Enoch writes that the angels had sinned against the animals. I'd always thought that perhaps that's what it was talking about when it said sinned against the animals, that they were taking and hybridizing them, or doing these very demonic experiments like mixing human with man, and maybe even that's how they come up with a mermaid. Maybe they took a torso of a man and mixed it with, say, not a dolphin, but the manatee. Uh, I mean, who knows? I mean, that's some of the thoughts that I've had in my mind because I know that in the cases of these mermaids, a lot of times their tail fin looks more like that of a manatee. So I've wondered just some of the crazy thoughts that I would have in my mind. But nonetheless, like you said, Bonnie, it's got to be demonic. It's got to be fallen angels that got involved in all this that have just really created some of the most hideous things. But it's just something that has survived down through time. The best way that's ever been said to me, they've just survived over time.
It's so functional. It is so viable. It is so, as you say, normal looking that, maybe it wasn't the product of Plum Island or some, 40-second below ground bunker someplace, that it was actually the expertise of the fallen angels. Um, but I'll tell you who would believe this in a heartbeat. That is the national forests, the rangers in the national forests. I have been reading some of the reports, what they have written. They're out there.
Yes, and it's interesting you bring them up because, um, I've heard many of their reports before. As
Yeah,
those get brought in and they go over them with a think tank,
yeah,
reviewing a lot of their reports. And one of the ones that they are reporting on, Bonnie, happens to be the very creature that was developed by the U.S. military, where they did these soldiers, and they call them like a dog man, is what they call them.
mm,
And normally, if you hear about the ones with the glowing eyes, like an amber colored eye, that's because they had them in this, it's like a amber type of fluid that they have them inside of a tank as they're going through their stages of, I call it metamorphosis, that may be the wrong word, but where they go through these changes. And so that's the one reason why you see those eyes like that, and they describe that. And the thing is the what they did when they first developed these soldiers agreed to do these programs. They were hoping that they would take more to the human side of it and less to the animalistic side of their natures, but it ended up not being that way, Bonnie. It ended up being that they took more to the animalistic side of it. And
when was the military doing this?
this program, I think, started, Bonnie, a little over almost 30 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, because I do know that they had both male and female soldiers that participated, and they were able to procreate. That was one thing they didn't know for sure. Now, all of the original subjects were put on tracking monitors, and we released them into the wild.
Well, what could possibly go wrong?
Right, exactly. What could go
they
wrong?
can they can multiply, and we release them.
Yes.
It's
So
like killer bees on steroids.
right, and we released them in Russia, and we also released them here in the United States, specifically in the along the Appalachian mountain chains. We released them in
Yes.
there, and we also released them out in the West. In I would say closer to your area there, where you're at in
Yes.
Oregon,
And
Washington, place like
yes, the
that.
Cascades very,
Yes,
very alive with these
yeah.
stories. Yes,
And
it's
they're
the
very
forest.
tall. They ended up when they transformed, they also transformed in height as well. So you're talking anywhere from 7 to 9 foot tall creatures,
Wow.
and their head. Those type creatures are more like a. Their heads ended up shaping more like a bear, but
Mm,
again, kind of like the werewolf. Their hair is very patchy upon their body, almost like something like a dog with a mange losing hair or something.
mm,
Um, but they still maintain the main torso of a human, but their brain, the function of the brain just would not develop to where they could still take commands. So that's where the problem came in, and so they just
I
really
bet
went bad.
humanity, being the product of Yehovah, of the Lord, of Yeshua, John 1:1, um, nobody can duplicate that. And if you try to mix it, it's going to disappear.
Yes, yes,
Okay, well, maybe that has no link to the army that's going to support from under the earth, that's going to support the Antichrist. But let me see, we have The asteroid in Israel. Okay, we talked about the werewolf and Ukraine. Where shall we go next? Which of those three?
Oh wow. Okay, so I tell you what, since we're on kind of the oddity things, maybe
Yeah,
we can
the
quickly go through
Muamua.
the asteroids. Yeah, the Muamua asteroid, more
Okay.
specifically, this one, as you know, Bonnie, when this came through, the there was a lot of speculation, and they even made that public that this could actually be an alien spacecraft. And what really made them more suspicious is when it began to leave our solar system, or our area where we're at here, as it flew past the Earth there, it actually increased in speed. And that was something that an asteroid normally doesn't do. And so that's one of the things that made it very suspicious. But then I got told this thing is actually coming back around again. I wasn't given any time frame of when it's coming around again, but I did ask. No one really seemed to know about the answer to that. But I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. And of course, the mere fact that it's coming back so soon
Yeah.
also has government officials worried that, this really may be an alien spacecraft. And what is it planning? What is the objective of this particular system that's coming out? Um,
It can't just park in a parking space until the Lord says, "Okay, it's ready now for you to come in and do whatever you're gonna do, Satan." So that
exactly.
they have to make loops.
Well, that's another interesting aspect too. If you think about it, Bonnie, everything is judgment is on a time clock,
Yeah, that's
and
the Lord sets the time.
exactly, and we know that he's if you read in whether you read in the I think what was it is it the let me pull up the Tanakh so I can look at some of the names of the books so I don't forget there. I think it's Titus. If I'm not no not Titus. Let me see here. Um, okay. Oh gosh, by the way, too, Malachi. Wow, that was something I just really got into again recently here. Uh, and I'm going to digress just for a moment, Bonnie, because I'm looking at these prophetic books. When we look at Malachi in the Hebrew version, we only have 3 chapters, but it basically goes into the 4th chapter as you go down. Now, reason why I wanted to bring this up was because if you remember, Jesus, when Yeshua speaks about Elijah, and I forget where he says this at, but he says to the apostles, if you can receive it, he said, this John, he said, he was the Elijah. And I'm going to pull that up too, and I'll tell you why. Because I was reading this in the Hebrew Matthew, and I've always kind of held to a view that when Yeshua spoke of this, that he actually was referring to it in the future.
Yeah, is this Matthew 17?
I will know in just a second. I was thinking it's around chapter 11, but I forget now. I'll know here in one
Okay.
second, though. Let's see.
Well, chapter 11 says it is Elijah who has come, but 17 says, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Where's that at, sis?
That's 17:12, 11. Yeshua replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands.
Yes. Okay. Now, I'm going to share something with you guys here.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating. And that's
Okay.
Matthew 17. Where were you at on that
11,
verse?
12, 11 to 12.
All right. Let's see if that's what I'm looking for. And I'll blow this up. Okay, yeah, let's see. Indeed, Elijah will come and will save all the worlds, what the Hebrew one said. Let's see. Who, why do you say? Okay, that's actually, okay, I don't think that's the one. There's another one. It's where he says, if you can receive it. Let me run that in there real quick. If.
And this is definitely in Matthew, because you have a Hebrew Matthew there.
Yeah, it is there. Let me see if you can. Okay, let's see. Oh my goodness. For some reason I'm thinking it's Matthew 11, but I can't think of the right search words to place on that. And let's see. So I'll look at Matthew 11 real quick. Yeah, I think it is. Let's see. Okay, so where he's talking about John. Okay, let's see. Wow. What form of Elijah do they use in the Greek or the King James New Testament? I know they don't say Elijah. They say, was it Elisha?
No.
Elias, I believe. Elias.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Matthew. Let's see. Yeah, Elias is the right one. All right, now. So, okay, 11:14. Oh, yeah, I got it now. It's actually Matthew 11:14, I believe, is right where we're going to. So let me go back now to it. And this will really make you scratch your head. He says here, we're almost to it now. Okay. For all the prophets in the law, I'm in verse 13, spoke concerning John. He says, if you wish to receive it, he is Elijah who is going to come. Now in Hebrew, it's just caught my attention reading it in English, right? So I looked at it in Hebrew, and he literally does say on there, Hu Eliyahu ha'atid labo. The word ha'atid literally means the future. You can't translate it any other way. So a lot of Hebrew words have multiple translations. Not atid. Atid is the root of the word. Ha'atid. He's saying the future. And then, of course, labo. Labo is to come. So when he's speaking here, he says, if you wish to receive it, and he's talking about John, he said, he is, literally, that's what he's saying, Hu Eliyahu. He is Elijah, the future to come. And now, interestingly enough, if you go a little further up in the verse when he's talking about that, he said he lets you know too that John was the messenger that was prepare the way before the Lord, make straight his paths. So what is Yeshua doing? He's quoting directly out of Malachi chapter 3. He clearly identifies John as fulfilling the scripture of Malachi 3 at the very beginning, where he says, I send my messenger and he shall clear the way before me. But then he goes a little further, and then when he says there, he says, if you, get back down to where it was at again, if you wish to receive it, and I think in the King James Version he says, if you can receive it. He is the Elijah who is going to come. Now that in a King James Bible would be Malachi chapter 4, but if you're in a Hebrew Bible, it would be Malachi chapter 3, verse 23 near the end, where he says, behold, I will send you, Elijah the prophet, before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. I think, Bonnie, and of course I still feel persuaded that's part of your two witnesses, but it seems to me this whole event of this binary system may be what ushers in the great and terrible day of the Lord, similar to that of what we had in Egypt. Because if you remember too, even in the two witnesses, what do? They have power to shut the heavens that it rain not in the days of their ministry. That they can bring fire on the earth. They can cause earthquakes in diverse places. Now, is it that they technically are doing that, or is it that they're prophesying of it, knowing what each step will take place next as a result of this system? Because there is historical evidence that that's exactly what Moses and Aaron were able to do. They knew about this system coming, and everything that you see happen during that time seems obviously that we had that binary system coming through. And if that's the way God chooses to bring his judgment, he brings it that way. I have no problem with that. But when I read what Jesus said here, I can't help but wonder if that's not exactly what we're about to witness. And even though it seems to be a mystery to everyone, if I feel like that Elijah will take and usher in more, I guess, more prophetically of what's fixing to happen to the people on this earth.
Yeah, it'll start uh, Revelation, the blood to water, the excessive hail,
Yes.
the it's Egypt all over again,
Oh, exactly.
all over again. I have said, multiple times that we're facing the first century between Yeshua and the Pharisees. We're facing that again.
Yes.
We
Completely.
are, I'm sorry,
Completely. I agree with you
completely.
completely on that. That's exactly
And
right.
it's also the days of Noah, like this thing that you were describing, and it's also Egypt with all the uh, unnatural events that had the one goal, and that was to get people's attention. That was the only goal. It was not to punish them. It was not to kill them. It was not to do anything. Well, I mean, eventually, when the ante got upped, but it was to get their attention because he's waiting. Don't you see now you need me? So uh, that's interesting. Are we looking in the sky and, that repeat? I mean, we have the Nibiru coming through that solar system. Is this the thing that is modifying its speed, its trajectory, um, that looks really creepy in the telescopes?
Well, that's the way that the Chilean astronomer described it. That it was on an elliptical orbit. So I could only imagine that that's what we're going to see. And I've always heard that it would, once it got near the sun, then the people would be able to see it and they wouldn't be able to hide it because the way that the planet is made, it's an iron planet, and it does not give off light. It doesn't reflect light very well. But once it's close enough to the sun, then it would begin to reflect light and it would start glowing in the sky, and we would actually be able to see it.
Yes, or at least if once it has the sun behind it, certainly we would be able to see it. I have read that one day you're going to look up in the sky and you're going to see how huge it is, and it is going to scare humans to death.
I can believe it. I can
We
believe
can't
it,
see
Bonnie.
it, but it's there. We can't see it. Okay, that's the asteroid. Um, I'm going to have to edit out some of that stuff where we were looking for scripture. So we'll go another maybe 4 minutes. How's
Okay,
that?
sure.
Okay. Um, let's go to Israel and, fears that are beginning to grow in the populace concerning civil war. Now, it must be going on 4 or 5 months that they have been protesting. There is this heightened a schism that I think is polarizing both sides, and this, I mean, where do you see this going, Steve?
It's not looking good. I know that the former Brigadier General, who is a reservist, Nehemiah Dagan, he's a former Israeli Air Force pilot. He's the chief education officer of the IDF, and he is in an interview on 103 FM. He was speaking with Errol Segal, and he is very concerned that we are headed to a civil war in Israel. He said, I'm afraid that the way we're going now will end up in a country where secular or religious liberal people won't want to live, and then there will be a group of messianics left in the country who believe that God will solve everything in the end. He said, I'm very afraid of civil war. He said, I have a terrible feeling that the situation right now is taking us to a place that will ultimately be a disaster. Why am I being so extreme? He says, because I know there is a way to stop this, and it is not with the help of demonstrations. The only ones who can stop it are the government. And of course, he goes on to speak about how that the government should get involved and should recognize that what they're doing is bringing this all the heightened tensions in the country. That if they ever want to bring this to a calm, the government needs to step up and say, look, okay, we're not going to do this. We're going to back off. But he's very concerned. And as he says, too, later, he says, I'm not calling for a civil war. I'm just telling you that it looks like we're headed to that. And I really myself have a hard time believing that Israel would go into a civil war to begin with. But I do understand that, Israelis can get really fed up with what's going on. And, the country...
they're armed to the teeth.
Oh, yes. And then you've got the situation with... you've got the religious extremists that are now in power, and they're really wanting to take advantage of that. And even though Netanyahu is somewhat of a secular Jewish guy, he's not really an Orthodox Jew to begin with, but he's taken advantage of the Orthodox community in order to be able to bring out his agenda and get back into power. So now he's having to kind of pander to them. And they're taking advantage of that 100%. In order,
threatening to leave.
Right.
All the time.
And so he doesn't want to lose his coalition. But at the same time, this is really a road to disaster. And I personally feel like, Bonnie, that eventually some of these hardline laws are going to pass, because you have to remember, even Netanyahu's got a major support amongst evangelical Christians that support Israel, that believe that prophecy is being fulfilled. They totally don't seem to recognize the fact that Jesus fulfilled much of the prophecies that they're looking at right now. But they believe that Israel has to come back into the focus of power, and that the law is going to go from Jerusalem.
And they don't know the truth of what the Sanhedrin under Talmudic rule, what that Israel would look like.
Exactly. And the thing is that my concern is that we begin to look down the barrels of a Talmudic law. It's not like with the rich young ruler that comes to Yeshua and he says to him, Master, he said, what must I do to receive eternal life? And he says, well, the commandments, and he begins to name the 10 commandments. He says, well, these I've done since my youth. He says, well, yes. You still lack one thing, So anyway, it's really going down a very rough, rocky road, and I'm afraid that it's going to be a disaster in the long run. One other thing, too, that I want to share, Bonnie, we only had 25 minutes there on the broadcast there, but I'm continuing on with a little bit more information I wanted to be able to share with you guys as well. And this is where Edward Houdeau, the former rabbi of Ukraine, he was actually also the mayor of Kharkiv, that expose the future coming of the Ukrainian war, and what Menachem Schneerson was saying that was going to happen. And I've actually shared this with you guys before, but one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up again tonight is because we know that it has been a slaughter of the Ukrainian people, just a slaughter of them in this battle, especially the Western Ukrainians there. So I wanted to remind you here in a 1994 speech published in the Volgograd newspaper, Slavianinan, the Chabad leader, and they called him Messiah Menachem Mendel Schneerson, outlined in his plans for destroying both Ukraine and Russia. And he quotes him here as saying this. He said, Slavs, and among them Russians, are the most unbending people in the world. Slavs are unbending as a result of their psychological and intellectual abilities created by many generations of ancestors, and it is impossible to alter these genes. Slav Russians can be destroyed, but never conquered. That is why this seed is subject to liquidation, and at first, a sharp reduction in their numbers. Now, I'm going to pause just for a moment. If you guys will recall, another major issue on this was a little while back I'd shared with you in one of the intel reports I was doing. It's been quite a while back now. Is that there was oh gosh, got to be very careful how I word this here. They were doing this thing that helped the government gather DNA from certain type of tests that they were doing. And one of the things that I was told is that DNA testing would allow them to be able to target individual ethnic groups for extermination. Later, that was supported by Mike over on Paul's program there. He also went into the very same things that I talked about there and really brought that to light. Now, he never says who they are, but if you look at what Menachem Schneerson is saying here, it clearly seems to be that he's letting you know who they really are that they wanted to take out. In this case here, the Slavs. So he goes on to say, first of all, we will divide the Slavic nation of 300 million, half of them Russians, into small countries with weak and severed connections. For this, we will use our old method, divide and conquer. We will try to pit these countries against each other and suck them into civil war for the sake of mutual destruction. And that's exactly what happened in Ukraine when the breakaway region, the Donbass region, broke up and the Donetsk and Luhansk declared their independence, basically dividing the country. Even though they weren't divided necessarily in half, it still was the pro-Russian side versus the Western side of Ukrainians in that regard. He went on to say the Ukrainians would think that they are fighting against the exceptionist Russia and struggling for their independence, and they will think that they have finally gained their freedom while they become fully subdued by us. The same will be thought by the Russians as though they defend their national interest to return their lands illegally taken away from them, and so on. He goes on to say, looking back in history, it must be admitted that these lands are the ancient ancestral lands of the Jewish Khazaria. This is Israel captured by Kiev's Rus, the ancient state of Russia with the capital in Kiev. In the 10th century, the Slavs are temporary guests on these lands and are subject to eviction. We will return this territory and build the great Khazaria, the Jewish state of these fertile lands, the same way as 50 years ago we created Israel, squeezing the Palestinians out. Israelis will partially relocate here, and we will drive Slavic cattle out far to the north, beyond Moscow. There will be a small northern territory, a reservation with compact population, a reservation like the Indian reservations in America. In the Jewish trilogy, Hudos identified the origin of this long festering hatred between the Khazarians and the Russians. The Great Khazarian Empire existed for several centuries until Russian province Sviatoslav in 965th year took both their city and their white temple. I don't know what that means by that, but nonetheless, Edward Hudo, though, does clearly identify this evil that is happening in Ukraine and it being a Chabad creation from the very beginning. I'm Steve Ben-Nun. You're listening to Israeli News Live. Thank you for listening. Have a blessed evening, and thank you for your support of our broadcast here. We do appreciate your help in such a very tumultuous time that we're living in. God bless and good evening.